My friend Cecil Giscombe and I, Lyn Hejinian, welcome you all to this evening's event. Enormous thanks to those of you who are participating, and also to those of you who came to contribute your good spirits and warm hearts and feisty intellects to the memory of the great Leroy Jones Amiri Baraka. Before we proceed, we want to thank the English department here at UC Berkeley, Professor Robert Hass, whose chair contributed some funds to this event, the Holloway Poetry Series that comes out of the English department here at Berkeley, and Christopher Patrick Miller, who designed this stunning program, is going to manage the video recording of the event. Okay, let's see if there's anything else that I want to say. There's going to be a reception following the event, and that will take place down the hallway. And people will, those of you who know where the English department grad student lounge is, you can just go down, and those who don't know can follow them. And now, Cecil will open the proceedings.
Well, good evening, and thank you for coming out this evening. Lyn Hejinian and I thank you for coming out this evening to celebrate the work of Amiri Baraka. As you heard, I'm Cecil Giscombe. I teach poetry here at the University of California. I'm going to just say a few quick things about the evening and about Amiri Baraka. I came to the work of Amiri Baraka back when he was Leroy Jones. As many of you know, he was the only black writer in Don Allen's New American Poetry anthology. In the other so-called mainstream anthologies that I encountered back when I was in high school and at university, there were no black writers. He said in that book, "Who has ever stopped to think of the divinity of Lamont Cranston?" Referring to the old radio program, The Shadow, this from his poem, In Memory of Radio. And I do remember radio, and I know some things about shadows as well. In the prose companion to the Allen anthology, published a few years later, The Poetics of the New American Poetry, is Baraka's piece on poetry and process, Hunting is Not Those Heads on the Wall, and I've had generations of my students read and think about the essay. It's a very smart essay, 7, 8 pages, very, very, very hard to find. In it, he says, the most valuable quality in life is the will to existence, the unconnected zoom, which finally becomes in anyone's hands whatever part of it he could collect, like dipping cups of water from the falls, which is what the artist does. Fools want to dictate what kind of dipper he uses. But at the end of Hunting is Not Those Heads on the Wall is another statement in the anthology. It's another statement on poetics, one titled Statement. It's quite short, and it provides a different range of pleasure. It begins, "The black artist's role in America is to aid in the destruction of America as he knows it." And it ends with a very short poem. "We are unfair and unfair. We are black magicians, black art we make in the black labs of the heart. The fair are fair and deathly white. The day will not save them, and we own the night." 25 years later, he wrote, looking back, it was easier to be heard from with hate whitey than hate imperialism. Those of us who have had occasion to meet Amiri Baraka, and I number myself among those, know that he was a complicated man, sometimes a difficult man. And a complicated writer, often a difficult writer, always a demanding writer. He admired engagement and was deaf on the dull. A few years ago, he gave a talk at Penn State, and Billy Joe Harris, who's here tonight, and I published a transcript of the talk in Mixed Blood, the journal that we edit. He wrote about coming to New York in the 1950s. So you hit the pavement, looking for the world-class intellectuals. I had read Thomas Hardy, I had read the Victorians. I read all that stuff. And then I found a person who actually had read all that stuff too. That was my hookup, he said, with Allen Ginsberg. And the magazine we put out called Eugen. We sought to bring together the various schools of American poetry that were just developing, that were in opposition to the poetic temperament of the 1950s, if you remember, a kind of gray flannel poetry. More recently, last May, in fact, writing on the Poetry magazine website, Amiri Baraka panned the new Norton anthology, Angles of Ascent, the contemporary African-American poetry collection that includes both Baraka and a number of people who are in this room tonight. We know who we are. It's a savage putdown. He wrote, "This new American poetry is mostly as dull as a stick." But toward the end, what he says as a challenge to both black writers and academics and to the history provided by the book is this. What the black arts movement did was to set a paradigm for the black artist to be an artist and a soldier. A sharp class distinction has arisen, producing a mini class of blacks who benefited most by the civil rights and black liberation movements, thinking and acting as if our historic struggle has been won, so that they can become as arrogant and ignorant as the worst examples of white America. Some years ago, I heard James Baldwin say, "We can do better than this." Likewise, Baraka continues to challenge us. Thank you.
And now hopefully you all have a program. If not, feel free to sneak up here to the table to get one. The first event on the program for tonight is a collective reading of Somebody Blew Up America, featuring Nilofar Gardezi, Jane Gregory, Stephen Lee, Rosa Martinez, Cecil Giscombe, and Seulghee Lee. So please come up, you also.
I think we know our parts. I'm the lead off. Somebody blew up America. All thinking people oppose terrorism, both domestic and international, but one should not be used to cover the other. They say it's some terrorist, some barbaric Arab in Afghanistan. It wasn't our American terrorist. It wasn't the Klan or the skinheads or the them that blows up nigger churches or reincarnates us on death row. It wasn't Trent Lott or David Duke or Giuliani or Schindler's. Helm's retiring. It wasn't the gonorrhea in costume, the white sheet diseases that have murdered black people, terrorized reason and sanity, most of humanity, as they pleases. They say, who say? Who do the same? Who is them paying? Who tell the lies? Who in disguise? Who had the slaves? Who got the bucks out of the bucks? Who got fat from plantations? Who genocided Indians? Tried to waste the black nation? Who live on Wall Street, the first plantation? Who cut your nuts off? Who raped your mom? Who lynched your pa? Who got the tar? Who got the feathers? Who had the match? Who set the fires? Who killed and hired? Who say they God and still be the devil? Who the biggest only? Who the most goodest? Who do Jesus resemble? Who created everything? Who the smartest? Who the greatest? Who the richest? Who say you ugly and they the good-lookingest? Who define art? Who define science? Who made the bombs? Who made the guns? Who bought the slaves? Who sold them? Who called you them names? Who say Dahmer wasn't insane? Who? 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 Who stole Puerto Rico? Who stole the Indies, the Philippines, Manhattan, Australia, and the Hebrides? Who forced opium on the Chinese? Who owned them buildings? Who got the money? Who think you funny? Who locked you up? Who owned the papers? Who owned the slave ship? Who run the army? Who the fake president? Who the ruler? Who the banker? Who? Who?
Who own the mine? Who twist your mind? Who got bread? Who need peace? Who you think need war? Who own the oil? Who do no toil? Who own the soil? Who is not a nigger? Who is so great, ain't nobody bigger? Who own the city? Who own the air? Who own the water? Who own your crib? Who rob and steal and cheat and murder, make lies through truth? Who call you uncouth? Who live in the biggest house? Who do the biggest crime? Who go on vacation anytime? Who killed the most niggers? Who killed the most Jews? Who killed the most Italians? Who killed the most Irish? Who killed the most Africans? Who killed the most Japanese? Who killed the most Latinos? Who? Who owned the ocean? Who owned the airplanes? Who owned the malls? Who owned television? Who owned radio? Who owned what ain't even known to be owned? Who owned the owners that ain't the real owners? Who own the suburbs? Who suck the cities? Who make the laws? Who made Bush president? Who believed the Confederate flag need to be flying? Who talk about democracy and be lying? Who?
Who the beast in Revelations, who 666, who know, who decide, Jesus get crucified, who the devil on the real side, who got rich from Armenian genocide, who the biggest terrorist, who changed the Bible, who killed the most people, who do the most evil, who don't worry about survival, who have the colonies, who stole the most land, who rule the world, who say they good but only do evil, who the biggest executioner, who own the oil, who want more oil, who told you what you think that later you find out a lie, who found bin Laden, maybe they Satan, who pay the CIA, who knew the bomb was gonna blow, who know why the terrorists learned to fly in Chicago and San Diego, who know why 5 Israelis was filming the explosion and cracking their sides at the notion, who need fossil fuel when the sun ain't going nowhere, who make the credit cards, who get the biggest tax cut, who walked out of the conference against racism, who killed Malcolm, Kennedy and his brother, who killed Dr. King, who would want such a thing? Are they linked to the murder of Lincoln? Who invaded Grenada, who made money from apartheid, who kept the Irish a colony, who overthrew Chile and Nicaragua later.
Who killed David Sebeco, Chris Hani, the same ones who killed Pico, Cabral, Neruda, Allende, Che Guevara, Sandino? Who killed Kabila, the ones who wasted Lumumba, Mondlane, Betty Shabazz, Princess Di, Ralph Featherstone, Little Bobby? Who locked up Mandela, Daruba, Geronimo, Asata, Mumia, Garvey, Dashiell Hammett, Alpheus Hutton? Who killed Huey Newton, Fred Hampton, Medgar Evers, Mikey Smith, Walter Rodney? Was it the ones who tried to poison Fidel? Who tried to keep the Vietnamese oppressed? Who put a price on Lenin's head? Who put the Jews in ovens and who helped them do it? Who said America first and okayed the yellow stars? Who killed Rosa Luxemburg, Liebknecht? Who murdered the Rosenbergs and all the good people iced, tortured, assassinated, banished? Who got rich from Algeria, Libya, Haiti, Iran, Iraq, Saudi, Kuwait, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, Palestine? Who cut off people's hands in the Congo? Who invented AIDS? Who put the germs in the Indians' blankets? Who thought up the Trail of Tears? Who blew up the Maine and started the Spanish-American War? Who got Sharon back in power? Who backed Batista, Hitler, Bilbo, Chiang Kai-shek? Who decided affirmative action had to go? Reconstruction, the New Deal, the New Frontier, the Great Society. Who do Tom ask Clarence work for? Who do come out of the colon's mouth? Who knew what kind of skeeza is a Condoleezza? Who pay Connolly to be a wooden Negro? Who give Genius Awards to Homo Locus Subsidiare?
Who overthrew Nkrumah, Bishop? Who poisoned Robeson? Who tried to put Du Bois in jail? Who framed H. Rat Brown, Jamil Al-Amin? Who framed the Rosenbergs, Garvey, the Scottsboro Boys, the Hollywood 10? Who set the Reichstag fire? Who knew the World Trade Center was going to get bombed? Who told 4,000 Israeli workers at the Twin Towers to stay home that day? Why did Sharon stay away? Who? Explosion of owl, the newspapers say. The devil face could be seen. Who make money from war? Who make dough from fear and lies? Who want the world like it is? Who want the world to be ruled by imperialism and national oppression and terror, violence, and hunger and poverty? Who is the ruler of hell? Who is the most powerful? Who you know ever seen God, but everybody seen the devil? Like an owl exploding in your life, in your brain, in yourself. Like an owl who know the devil, all night, all day if you listen. Like an owl exploding in fire. We hear the questions rise in terrible flame like the whistle of a crazy dog, like the acid vomit of the fire of hell. Who and who and who and who?
Ronaldo Wilson.
Thank you for organizing this, Lyn and Cecil. I'm just going to read from the answer to that, who, it's you. This is from Six Persons, an autobiography. Well, it's actually fiction, but, you know, split, instructive. You are always finding yourself hooking up and vanishing. I mean, it must seem that way to the blind. You always looking, craning your head to see something there off in the distance. Yeah, you do that. You look. Your eyes blow up huge, your children's too. You know, you can identify all your children like you could identify yourself. The eyes. But then you haven't actually vanished. Maybe vanished from one spot, one situation, but that's not vanishing. Maybe vanished from one spot, one situation, but that's not vanishing. There's no magic to walking, to going where you're going. Do you know, by the way, where that is? Going in and out of yourself? Collect to project. You remember the 12th birthday and then all the slants and jousts, but do you remember being 16, being at Rutgers, checking out a Princeton student sitting next and in front of you in the chemistry class with the Princeton cut and striped shirt or blue button down and the sneakers and khakis? You thought that was super hip. You had just got off the wagon out of the ghetto, north of Beringer in Italian lands, fastest rule in high school, where young detectives, football players, community relations men, politicians, gangsters, the failures, executives, plain Americans got their line cohered. You had a black wool suit, like a gray flannel suit, but it had Bloodtown bells, 22-inch bottoms, and a vest, very hip. You remember in the Jones Street Y, just a block away from where you sit today, a chick said, "Hey, that suit is very hip." One of the best days of your young, clarifying life. We would stand some evenings the real cool on South Orange Avenue near Jones Street and discuss the world of music, my man sounds, discuss sounds with my brother who is now fat and given to checkered seersucker and Panama stingies. You would say, hey Gene, what's happening? And hear that what was and yet was and still to be, what Miles was doing, Miles and cool. I didn't dig at the time that Miles was so hooked up with white people. Miles had you whistling Venus de Milo, Budo, Godchild, Mood, Jeru, Boplicity. The titles were deep, the orchestration with tubas, French horns, and Miles, nigger cool, was startling there on High Street with groceries on my shoulder. You was going to high school soon, you go to Rutgers, and then to stand with Jeannie, my man Jeannie, and say, yeah, Miles is cool, man. You dig Miles? I can't even say that. That was George Washington's Godchilds featuring Miles Davis. If you was really in your hip, you'd say Miles Dewey Davis. Baraka instructs, takes you by the throat, goading you. And you, LJ, you'd be trying to find out what cognoscenti meant. Linguist. Apparition, Miles, Smiles, Bird, Charlie Parker, Bird is fantastic, drastic. You need to come over to the Silver Saddle Man, dig Bird, Charlie Parker, here it comes. You heard Bird, Charlie Parker, this is the part where I might screw it up. Bloom did a Bird, yeah, I'm faking it, flaking it, whatever. In the night, Eugene, I'm not pretending, engaging with something that I just found, by the way, did not understand the fictive economy in Baraka, chock full of nuts. Chock full of blacks, absentia, inabsent. In the night, Eugene, you had a band on Malcolm X, Shabazz Boulevard. Belmont Band, Good Mountain, The Hills, Simmons Alto, Dallas Tubes, Tubs, you put on topped, sideways near the corner of the lips to stimulate the coolth. The coolth? The stealth of grown to see. To see, you dig Charlie Parker, Bird, that was running through our streets. Through our air and minds and my fingers, packing groceries for Steve at the 18-1 and M supermarket, carrying them Saturdays down this same high street, though in them days, you came from that. Yeah, Skip. You still in that? You were all that. You are love and the final revenge of the African upon the colonizers, the well-being state of the music. Turn to fire and knives. You got the technology to kill these buggers, or are you just gonna talk? You just gonna talk and get somebody killed. That I notated. Them days later on, that's all you did. Thank you.
Geoffrey G. O'Brien.
I first met Baraka in 1988 in an incredibly boring reading sponsored by the Anyi Review in a church. And Amiri began by reading conventional poems that had titles and began and ended. And then he just started beating the podium and saying Africa over and over again. About 5 minutes in, people started to shift in their seats and their asses hurt. 10 minutes in, they were familiar with what was going on and cool with it. 15 minutes in, they were unhappy. 20 minutes in, he stopped. And then read some more poems. It was then that I began 25 years so far of listening to and reading Baraka and understanding that one of the reasons to do so is because he gives you the repetitions you need, not the ones that you want. And the durations aren't yours to choose. I'm going to read a poem that I teach just about every year. And so I thought I'd read it from my incredibly ugly course reader from this semester as a token of his ongoingness. It's a poem called Das Kapital. And it's full of Amiri's warm wit, which is a form of love, and his dry ice satire, which is also a form of love. And I think is stumping for a kind of positive, paranoid reading of the world that's neither Marx's political economy nor what we encounter on the 11 o'clock news. Das Kapital. Strangling women in the suburban bush. They bodies laid around rotting while martinis are drunk. The commuters looking for their New Yorkers feel a draft and can get even drunker watching the TV later on the Ford replay. There will be streams of them coming, getting off near where the girls got killed. 2 of them strangled by the maniac. There are maniacs hidden everywhere, can't you see? By the dozens and double dozens, maniacs by the carload, though they are a minority. But they terrorize us uniformly, all over the place. We look at the walls of our houses, the garbage cans parked full, strewn around our defaulting cities, and we could get scared. A rat eases past us on his way to a banquet. Can you hear the cheers raised through the walls full of rat humor? Blasts of fire. Some woman's son will stumble and die with a pool of blood around his head, but it won't be the maniac. These old houses crumble. The unemployed stumble by us, straining, ashy-fingered, harassed. The air is cold. Winter heaps above us, consolidating itself in degrees. We need an aspirin or something and pull our jackets close. The bald-head man on the television set goes on in a wooden way. His unappetizing ignorance cannot be stood or understood. The people turn the channel looking for good times and get a Negro with a pull-down hat. Flashes of maniac shadows before bed. Before you pull down the shade, you can see the leaves being blown down the street, too dark now to see the writing on them, the dates and amounts we owe. The streets, too, will soon be empty after the churchgoers go on home, having been saved again from the maniac, except a close-up of the chief mystic's face rolling down to his hands will send shivers through you, looking for traces of the maniac's life, even there among the mithrophrenics. What can you do? It's time, finally, to go to bed. The shadows close around and the room is still. Most of us know there's a maniac loose. Our lives a jumble of frustrations and unfilled capacities. The dead girls, the rat's noise, the flashing somber lights, the dead voice on television. Was that blood and hair beneath the preacher's fingernails? A few other clues. We mull them over as we go to sleep. The skeletons of dollar bills, traces of dead, used up labor, lead away from the death scene until we remember a quiet fit that everywhere is the death scene. Tomorrow you got to hit it, sighs through us like the wind. We got to hit it, like an old song at Radio City, working for the Yankee dollar when we were children. And then we used to think it was not the wind, but the maniac scratching against our windows. Who is the maniac, and why everywhere at the same time?
Positive knowledge with Oluyemi Thomas and Ijeoma Thomas.
We first met Amiri Baraka in New York, so we really know him through the music. It was a Cecil Taylor concert. It was winter. It was cold. And we were at a table with he and his wife and some other people checking on Cecil Taylor. And been a couple other meetings that Oluyemi's going to just mention briefly.
Well, we had the honor to be on the festival. Well, first of all, good evening to everyone. And thank you for having your hearts in a good place to send Amiri Baraka in a higher level of heaven. You know, each one of us with our relatives and loved ones, when we think of them positive, we push them further, and they come to us and help us and push us up. So we're really helping each other. But we had the honor to be on the same festival with Amiri Baraka in Switzerland. The festival was called the Uncool Festival. And they had the largest tent I ever seen. It was up in the Alps, you know. We went way up, then came down. Then we had another honor to be on a festival with them recently in June in New York called the Vision Festival. And Amiri was hunched over, but he said, play that, play that. He had this poem that he kept, play that. I said, man, this brother's, you know, at his young age, still had that fire in him. So it helps all of us, you know. I enjoyed all of the poets that read today, because you had that fire. And that's what we got to do, keep the fire moving.
You are not looking at me while I am seeing through one more facade of skin. You are not looking at me while I am seeing through one more facade of skin. X-ray vision to the heart goes all the way, 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 all the way to the dawn of reflex, that mutinous blindness. Out of sight, out of mind, a mirror's trick. We can't go on, our words never mean. Silence climbing the broken sky. Blue knocking on invisible doors, invisible sounds. Breaking through, breaking through, breaking through, breaking through the sound barrier. That first dust, red and liquid again. There is an inner way when far sight is not near enough. The mind you have lost is this loveless, placeless face. Look into my eyes. I'll show you how it works. Broken words on concrete tongue. No food, not even water for this drought. that sees in, not out, sees in, not out, in, out. Constricted cells conspiracy, the remote we can't control. Who wants to take the long way anymore? Some have forgotten how to walk, how to run, how to be, hands out asking, dried blood, eyes closed, moments melted, cooling, blurred, liquefied, stagnant, sounds like an inside job. Glances glares from searchlights, interrogation, examination, aiming books full of X. Move the world out of the fire. This curled asking, discomforted, disturbed, memory in memorials don't need a handout, too many without. Time's up. Asking bruised beyond battle, weeping over weapons, running from the top of trees, face turned sun. Beneath us, reflections, one mind released from the decomposing brain. Lines, stalk the people-tight sidewalks, speak on buses, on subways, underground, headed downtown to the east side, translating the loud of the city into notation. These cats reside in rooms that echo voices of us. Urban lines, stalk the people-tight sidewalks, speak on buses, on subways, underground, head downtown to the east side, translating aloud the city into notation. These cats reside in rooms that echo voices of us, living each day with tomorrow, going to work, school, sleep, sleep. of concrete glass, erecting citadels of the mind, architects of change. Many are wounded by misunderstanding, a weapon more fatal than any invention. They seek shelter alone, not lonely. Music, their music, relentless roars on. Music, their music, relentless roars on. From old doorways, bright corners, crowded classrooms, restless. Don't stop. The lions are loose. Thank you. You can leave that.
As it was.
Positive knowledge. Thank you so much. Amiri Baraka could be a difficult and complicated person, and also was very funny and was also a trickster. I had a conversation with Lyn Warr at a literary festival when he was getting in trouble for having said that 4,000 Israelis did not show up at the Twin Towers because they'd been tipped off by Mossad, Israeli intelligence, that the buildings were going to come down, which isn't true. And people were giving him a hard time about it. And we had been starting an argument about the poem called Black Art. And after he had this argument with these other people, he turned to me and says, "Does that bother you?" And I said, "No, it doesn't bother me, but you know that line in Black Art, this poem is a dagger in the slimy belly of the owner Jews? That bothers me." And he said, "Are there other things in this world that bother you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Me too." And that was the end of that conversation. I'm going to read one poem by Leroy Jones and one poem by Amiri Baraka. This is The Young Man in Greenwich Village, and it's a poem called An Agony as Now. I am inside someone who hates me. I look out from his eyes, smell what fouled tunes come into his breath, love his wretched women. Slits in the metal for sun, where my eyes sit turning at the cool air, the glance of light or hard flesh rubs against me, a woman, a man, without shadow or voice or meaning. This is the enclosure, flesh, where innocence is a weapon and abstraction. Touch, not mine or yours, if you were the soul I had and abandoned when I was blind and had my enemies carry me as a dead man. If he is beautiful or pitied, it can be pain, as now, as all his flesh hurts me. It can be that, or pain, as when she ran from me into the forest, or pain, the mind, silver, spiraled, whirled against the sun, higher than even old men thought God would be, or pain, and the other, the yes, inside his books, his fingers, they were withered yellow flowers and were never beautiful. The yes, you will, lost soul, say beauty. beauty, practice as the tree, the slow river, a white sun in its wet sentences. Oh, the cold men in their gale ecstasy, flesh or soul, the yes, their robes blown, their bowls empty, they chanted, my heels not at yours, flesh or soul as corrupt, where the answer moves too quickly, where the God is the self after all. Cold air blown through narrow blind eyes, flesh white hot metal, glows as the day with its sun. It is human love. I live inside. A bony skeleton you recognize as words or simple feeling, but it has no feeling, as the metal is hot, is not given to love. It burns the thing inside it, and that thing screams. 26 years old, Amiri Baraka is starting to write poems. Here's the man in his late 50s writing his poems about black artists. This one is for Son House, the great bluesman of the Delta. Wise 3. Son, singing, found some words. Son, singing in that other language, talking about, baby, why you leave me here? Talking about, up under the sun, cotton in my hand. Son singing, think he bad, because he can speak they language, talk about dark was the night, the ocean deep, white eyes cut through me, made me weep. Son found singing words, think he bad, speak they language. It's all right. I say, it's all right with me. Look like, yeah, we're gonna be here, a taste. Thank you.
Devorah Major.
Hello, I do two short pieces, one by Baraka, one to him, or one by Leroy Jones, because that was during that era. I just, when the Black Arts Movement started, I was a teenager, and so I'm a product of that and of Baraka, and like several of the poets here, was honored enough to be reading at festivals with him and on stages with him, growing further. And he's a man of integrity and, more important, evolution. Who he was at 30, he was that and more at 40, and those things that he had to take off because he was an error, he did, to the point of even becoming a feminist before he died. You know, so I have much respect for that. I have much respect for people who evolve, and think he needs to be honored for that. The Liar. What I thought was love in me, I find 1,000 instances as fear. Of the tree's shadow winding around the chair, a distant music of frozen birds rattling in the cold. Wherever I go to claim my flesh, there are entrances of spirit, and even its comforts are hideous uses I strain to understand. Though I am a man who is loud on the birth of his ways, publicly redefining each change in my soul as if I had predicted them, and profited biblically, even though their chanting weight erased familiarity from my face. A question, I think, an answer, whatever sits counting the minutes till you die. When they say, is it Roy who is dead? I wonder, who will they mean? I love he was so young, talking about what they would talk about him when he died. On considering a lifetime filled with resistance for Amiri. Your words are embers, licking flames, magna growing and then exploding from the volcano's groin. Your barbs tear skin and make some bleed deeply. Who of us has not been fed by your truths? Who of us has not found a path to follow, however rocky and steep, a path that you dug out, always trying to open the eyes of justice and waken the spirits of resistance. You have shown us how many years a man can keep looking and not grow blind, keep speaking and not have his words become jumbled and finally mute. And now we look around to find the generations who have grown from the words you planted in the distended belly of these harsh, hard times. And how many more generations who will never know you as flesh will splice together words out of humility or arrogance, fury or determination, elegance or awkwardness, which are sheltered in the branches of your spirit, fed by the roots of your vision, and tested on the blade of your convictions. Thank you.
Lyn Hejinian.
Some 3-4 years ago, Amiri Baraka gave a reading in this room. This is a handsome, stolid, boring academic room with a nice rug and uncomfortable but big wooden chairs. And he completely transformed the room. I was teaching his work in a big-ish lecture course and told all the students to come. Many of them did, and they were completely spellbound. It was one of the most generous and creative readings I've ever heard a poet give in my now long life of going to thousands of poetry readings. I miss his spirit, but it's still here, even in this boring room, and with all of us. And I'm going to read an early poem of his, one that Cecil actually referred to, in memory of radio. I too remember radio, so in memory of radio. Who has ever stopped to think of the divinity of Lamont Cranston? Only Jack Kerouac that I know of, and me. The rest of you probably had on WCBS and Kate Smith, or something equally unattractive. What can I say? It is better to have loved and lost than put linoleum in your living room. Am I a sage or something? Mandrake's hypnotic gesture of the weak? Remember, I do not have the healing powers of Oral Roberts. I cannot, like F.J. Sheen, tell you how to get saved and rich. I cannot even order you to gas chamber Satori like Hitler or Goody Night. And love is an evil word. Turn it backwards. See? See what I mean? An evil word. And besides, who understands it? I certainly wouldn't like to go out on that kind of limb. Saturday mornings, we listened to Red Lantern and his undersea folk. At 11, let's pretend, and we did, and I, the poet, still do, thank God. What was it he used to say after the transformation, when he was safe and invisible and the unbelievers couldn't throw stones? Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows. Oh, yes, he does. Oh, yes, he does. An evil word it is, this love. Thank you.
Seulghee Lee.
I had the incredible honor of introducing Mr. Baraka at that reading that Lyn mentioned. And afterward, he asked me where I was from, and I told him Tobacco Road, North Carolina. And after my obsequious invocation of the very beginning of his long poem In the Tradition, where he talks about, cannot deal with Skyman and Daryl, Magic or Kareem, cannot deal with double-dipping hip doctors, deadly in flight. We talked about basketball, and he understood the kind of Manichaean morality represented by Duke and UNC. And the reason I mention this is there was a snowstorm on the East Coast last week, and the first Duke-Carolina game of the season was postponed to right now. And so, of course, it's an incredible honor, and I'm very grateful to be here, to be celebrating Mr. Baraka collectively like this. And on the other hand, there's a part of me that thinks Mr. Baraka wants me to be watching the game. Anyway, I'm gonna read Wise 9. It's set to Reverend Pearlie Brown's God Don't Never Change. Our war was for liberation to end slave times. Now war is over. We free, they say. Who they? Who say? What free gonna be? There are cities we can go to. There are cities of light and newing. So what these faces, laws, hover. These swine whine, law, death people. These death time rebs return to crow. These slave master corpse leap off the flow. These sheep-faced coward monster hates. These death word carriers and slave lovers. There was war before, be war again. Died before, will die again. But not gonna die, not gonna leave, not gonna cry too long, not gonna grieve. Free is who we are and be. Love, what will lift us, we. Struggle, love struggle against primitive death. While you walking round, spirit death tie you down, slave death and servant death, and let me work for us to be. Thank you.
Duncan McNaughton.
It is a frame-up. The first thing I wanted to mention was Bulworth, if you haven't looked at it for a while. It's a very amusing movie, and I'm supposing that all of the lines Baraka had in the film were his own. My cousin, Warren Beatty, wrote the rest of it and directed it and produced it. That's on my mother's side. A couple of things that have already come up, like the North Carolina Duke game, because I was down there for a year in Chapel Hill, and I left, and I went to New York. It is fear, which is what allows us to tolerate existence given the cruelty and suffering that we're witness to all the time. It's the fear in each of us. And it's a form of dishonesty, if not just dishonesty, in each of us around that fear that makes it possible for what Leroy called the bad guys to be the bad guys over and over and over again, everywhere. Tomorrow is the 49th anniversary of the murder of Malcolm X. That was 21 February 1965. Malcolm had made the Hajj in April of 1964, and he came back, and there's at least one public letter that he wrote not too long after coming back, which let a lot of people know, or everyone who read it, that all the molecules had been rearranged in him by having made the Hajj. And in my view, and I'm sure in the view of others, it made him a far more dangerous man on both sides of the coin than he had been before. And both sides of the coin got rid of him. I know it meant a lot to Baraka. I met Baraka for the first time about this time of year in 1965. I was working as a clerk in the 8th Street bookstore in New York, which was owned by two brothers, Ted and Eli Willents. And they also were publishers. They published Corinth books. At that time, the Maximus poems of Charles Olson, Diane de Prima's Dinners and Nightmares. And they also published in association with Leroy Jones and Totem Press a series of pamphlet-like books. This is one of them. The books were given to me by Ted and Eli when I went to work for them. It's when they moved the store across from 8th and McDougal Street to 17 West 8th Street. And the books that they had published in association were books by Ed Dorn, Allen Ginsberg, Leroy Jones, which is this one, a preface to a 20-volume suicide note, Kerouac, O'Hara, Oppenheimer, Snyder, Sorrentino, Phil Whalen, and then a book with works by Carol Bourget, Rochelle Owens, Diane Wachowski, and Barbara Morav. It was a nice little gift to get. And at the same time, I met him because he came in to pick up a special order. And I had just spent a short time at Princeton University studying Arabic, and I'd left it. Big mistake, I don't know. To become, I thought, a poet. But I was interested in those things, and the book he came to pick up was a particular edition of Rumi's poetry, whom most of you will know as a famous Muslim Sufi, spiritual poet and so forth. Him and his family actually came from what is now Afghanistan. I was working in the store with a couple of other people that stuck with me, Peter and Julius Orlovsky. They were the cleanup. I worked the 6 to midnight shift, and Julia and Peter would come in and mop up and so forth afterwards. And another guy named A.B. Spellman, who was a friend of Roy Jones and also a poet and also wrote on the music. He's still around, as far as I know. Al Young is here tonight.
I am.
It's a good news. Was it not Ted and Eli that published?
Yes, of course.
Dancing?
My first book of poems.
Right. I don't really have a lot to say. I'm going to read two things. Neither one of them are Baraka. The first is me. Something Empedocles said when he was saying there's a difference between incarnation and incarceration. Something about the curriculum, that existence is where the soul goes to learn how to interpret itself again. And then this, you have to pardon the dry mouth, is from an interview, not with him. The interviewer is Arthur Taylor, the drummer. And the person he's interviewing says, the main thing is, I'm here because I did something wrong on my planet. I'm not really from this planet. I did something wrong on my planet and they sent me here to pay my dues. I figure pretty soon my dues should be paid. And they're going to call me back home so I can rest in peace. And Arthur Taylor says, "You're not serious about that, are you?" "I can't be from this place, Arthur. There is no love here, and I love people. All I see is hate around me, except for a few of my friends. That's what's wrong with the earth today. Black and white on this planet, there is no love. There is only hate. I was thinking about reading some books on anarchy because all this government stuff is bullshit anyway. These governments drawing lines between men, tribes between tribes, yellow people against brown people, against black, against Muslims, against Christians, against Hindus. What is all of that? I know I'm not from this planet. I can't be. I must be from someplace else in the universe because I'm a total misfit. I can't get with none of this." That's pretty much where I'm at. And I know there were aspects or elements, components in Baraka's personality and thinking that were there too. And I was sort of hoping Roscoe Mitchell would be here tonight because I had the honor of driving him to that gig he did with Baraka a few years ago at the Victoria Theatre, and that's what we talked about coming over the bridge. Roscoe seemed to be, as a lot of the people in the music are, alert to what Johnny Griffin said in that interview. So I'm sorry he's gone too.
Michael Warr.
Hello. Thanks, Lyn and CS, for putting this together. Like many of us, I first met Amiri Baraka as Leroy Jones on the page. And perhaps unlike many of you, it was in a book that I stole. I was a teenager at the time. And I would be reading from that book tonight, but as they say, what goes around comes around, and that book was stolen from me. But the title of it was 3,000 Years of Black Poetry. That book had a profound influence on me. That's where I met Gwendolyn Brooks, and that's where I met Amiri Baraka. And in that book there were two poems by Amiri, by Leroy Jones at the time, prefaced in a 20-volume suicide note, the title poem of his first collection of poems, but also the first poem that I ever read by him. So, you know, hearing somebody blow up America, I really want to read this poem on the same stage because I just think that happening shows at least a bit of the complexity of the man. Nowhere near the complexity, but just the fact that these two poems could appear in the same place. So this is the first poem I ever read by Amiri Baraka, preface to a 20-volume suicide note. Lately, I've become accustomed to the way the ground opens up and envelops me. Each time I go out to walk the dog, or the broad edge, silly music the wind makes when I run for a bus. Things have come to that. And now each night I count the stars, and each night I get the same number. And when they will not come to be counted, I count the holes they leave. Nobody sings anymore. And then last night I tiptoed up to my daughter's room and heard her talking to someone. And when I opened the door, there was no one there. Only she on her knees, peeking into her own clasped hands. So I had the good fortune of being in Amiri Baraka's orbit many times since stealing that book. And most recently, it was last December, when I was really kind of engaged in a back and forth with him because of his contributions to a book I'm editing called Of Poetry and Protest from Emmett Till to Trayvon Martin. But as early as, well, in May of last year, I had the good fortune to be at the home of the Baraka family, and we were shooting video of him and doing portraits of he and Amina. And that video, there's so much in there. It's full of wisdom, and not just poetic wisdom, but it's really kind of all-encompassing. And we only talked for about 20 minutes. But in that video, he retells the story of Martin Luther King surprising him and coming to their home in Newark. The house was surrounded by people. There were helicopters in the air. When the police knocked on the door, Amiri says in this video that he thought it was a bust. So it opens the door, and it's Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King says, "Hello, Leroy." People have told me you are a bad person, but you don't look like such a bad person. So, you know, in telling this story, Amiri also kind of points out, well, first, one of the things he says is that when he opened the door and he saw Dr. King, he says he didn't look that kingish, you know, which I thought was pretty poetic. But, you know, he talks about how it was only 10 days after that Martin Luther King was assassinated, 10 days later. And then in the same breath, he talks about meeting Malcolm X, and a month later, Malcolm X was killed. And he talks about the common message that they had for him was that there was a need for a united front within, among this struggle of blacks. And that common thread seemed to have had a profound impact on him. He was very passionate when he spoke about it. And one of the things he said is that he likes to tell people that whether you are for King or for Malcolm X, they both were murdered. There's just so much in this conversation. I could go on, but I'm going to end the way he ended the interview that day, which was, I think, very wise and timely. And he talked about how you always have to reverse the reversal. You know, that in the struggle, that's a constant, reversing the reversal. I think that we can really see the need of that today. And he went on to say that what you've done will be attacked. You will have to do it again and again and again, and that it's a continuing struggle. And then his last words were, "A luta continua." Thank you.
William J. Harris.
Billy Joe Harris.
Howdy. On Tuesday, I'm from the University of Kansas, and on Tuesday there was a celebration of Baraka there, and it's great that these celebrations are going on around the country. Now I'm going to read two things. One is part of an essay which is going to be published in a couple weeks, and of mine, and about Baraka, and another one will be a piece of one of his short stories. So I'll start with the essay. Some bluish notes on Amiri Baraka. If my letter regarding your poem sounded contentious, I'm sorry. But I've gone deep and gotten caught with the images of the world that exists, or that will be there after we go. I have not the exquisite objectivity of circumstance, the calm, precise mind of luxury. I can't sleep, and I do not believe in all this relative shit. There is a right and a wrong, a good and a bad, and it's up to me,
you, and all the so-called minds to find out. It is only knowledge of things that will bring this moral earnestness. Amiri Baraka to Edward Dorn, 1961. The Western philosopher. He shits and doesn't even notice it. He has his mind on the stars. Warning, don't let him sit on your head. William J. Harris. On January 18th, with bagpipes and African drums, singers, one tap dancer, and many speakers, including poets, politicians, and community leaders, the life and art of Amiri Baraka was celebrated at a 4-hour funeral service at Symphony Hall in Newark, New Jersey. He died January 9 at the age of 79. It is hard to believe he has left us so soon. Each time I saw him, he was so alive and vital, especially in performance. He was a fighter and an artist to the end. Since the mainstream never understood Amiri, it surprises me that there has been such a mainstream response to his death, including the front page of the New York Times. It seems like the cultural establishment realized something important had happened, whether they understood it or not. But what really heartens me is the insightful comments by such people as Ishmael Reed, Questlove, Greg Tate, and Richard Brody, and in such strange places as Ebony, the New Yorker, and the Wall Street Journal. And Ish Reed is right in his Wall Street Journal post. The mainstream has ignored Baraka's important work after 1960. In spite of the narrow-minded dumbness that has been floating around Baraka, he has made his mark on our times. Baraka was a great artist in many areas, including poetry, music criticism, the novel, and nonfiction. But I want to talk about him as an anti-colonial writer, a writer who wanted to see the world from his point of view and not the master's. What I've always loved about Amiri was his superiority to white power or any power structure. In short, he was doing the judging. As he says in Home Social Essays, he refuses to merely tag along, reciting white judgment of the world. To fully understand Baraka's project, we need to revisit W. Du Bois' key concept of the double consciousness. In his 1903 classic, The Souls of Black Folk, Du Bois famously observes, "It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at the world through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. This is a profound insight into the minority mind, and perhaps any mind that does not control the world. Baraka's art has always tried to destroy the double consciousness, has tried to see the world through his own eyes, eyes embodied in a particular body and place, culture." Okay. So now, one reason I want to read this is, especially the mainstream press has said, Amiri Baraka has written one work, and that's Dutchman. And after 1964, he didn't do anything. And he's had an incredible career, and I think we can see very much here tonight. A great artist who's produced much great stuff. So in 2007, he produced a collection of short stories called The Tales of it's called Tales of the Out and the Gone. Okay, and he has try a third word, a short story called A Monk's Story. It's a short piece, but I'm going to make it shorter and just read part of it. And I have, one reason I'm going to read it because this is later Baraka, and Baraka has been doing incredible stuff, and he's doing this extraordinary stuff with language and trying to be some sort of equivalent of what people were doing with free jazz. If you watch him through his career, he's learned so much from the musicians.
A monk's story is about simply meeting Thelonious Monk not long after he died. Okay, a monk's story. It takes place in Newark. There's a lot of humor, and I will stop because it's a short story. But if I keep talking about it, it'll be a very long story. I was at Monk's funeral with Amina, but then a few months later, I ran into him in Newark. What's your name, brother? I was recovered from the shock. I knew it wasn't Monk, but this dude was an incredible replica. Monk. He had a ragged line to his mouth, trying not to laugh, but Monk always looked like that. Monk? Laughing like we do. It was funny, all right, but the man wasn't smiling anymore. Oh, maybe he was, but his mouth was stretching into a scatting, jacking that hip number. Listening took me away from the mystery. But I then agreed in my answer. A monk digger who looked like the high priest. A couple minutes, the two of us at the corner of Bradford Place and Helsley Street stood there, dipping and learning some monk steps. It was a groove because the dude scattered like a horn. No, he was scatting like a box, a piano. No, a piano. No, I mean in my ear, head. I heard a piano. I heard Monk out of this dude's mouth. But your name, man, is it really Monk? What do you mean? He shot this stare reserved for squares. All right, your name is Monk, but you ain't saying it was sounded stupider to me then than it does now. Hey man, I ain't never been dead. I wasn't in that jive box they had in the church. Plus, Monk lived in the city. I'm from home. From home? The South? Yeah, he lit up around the eyes, but his mouth broke into a narrow rest. The South Ward. You from Newark? I ain't from Newark. I'm in there. You see me. It ain't a from. I was laughing, but my afternoon was bent in a hip way. The top of my head was warm like when you want to tell somebody right away. You been in Newark? How long? How old are you? Hey man, I don't go telling my age. No? No. You should stop telling yours too. People start to believe you believe in time. Now the laughing was filling up my whole head. There was a kind of delight in it. Not the mystery, because I'd already floated into the rationality. Wow, this is really deep. I mean, you are Monk. I mean, really. I mean, not just the way you look and sound, but yeah, I told you my name. And you're trying to hook me up with this dead brother. You can see I ain't dead. Yeah, more laughter. I know, but like, you might say anything. So I say, you don't, go on. You don't play piano, do you? What do you mean, do I? If I was going to be named Monk, wouldn't I play piano? But I started. No, let's get this straight. Let's get this straight. You don't believe in no ghosts and shit, do you? Nah, man. Then only one answer. I'm another Thelonious. Is that your first name? Please, that dude was taking me over Niagara without a barrel. Yes, Thelonious dear Monk. Hey, brother. I was trying to make conversation, really, but I guess that cold analytical tip must have poked out. The dude laughed to get me to check myself. Okay, I apologize for being lame. It's just the whole thing is out, really out.
Sorry, no, I was just getting around.
Bill Berkeley.
How do you make it so that this doesn't sound harsh?
Just stand right where you are. Sounds good.
Stand your ground?
Just don't speak right into it.
Okay, I'll try. I'm beginning with a poem by Frank O'Hara that features lunch with Leroy Jones, Amiri, who was Leroy then, followed by the poem by Amiri Baraka that is printed partially. Part of it is in the program, tone poem. So when we get to that, you can follow at least part of it on the bouncing ball. O'Hara, because it was Frank who introduced me to Leroy when, as Amiri, he put it a few years later, many years later, I was just a kid. Hey, when I first met you, you was just a kid. He was 5 years older, but way ahead as an accomplished poet, editor, essayist, playwright. And Frank and Leroy had, as they say in diplomatic circles, a special relationship. Personal poem. Now when I walk around at lunchtime, I have only two charms in my pocket. An old Roman coin Mike Kanemitsu gave me and a bolt head that broke off a packing case when I was in Madrid. The others never brought me too much luck, though they did help keep me in New York against coercion. But now I'm happy for a time and interested. I walk through the luminous humidity, passing the house of Seagram with its wet and its loungers, and the construction to the left that closed the sidewalk. If I ever get to be a construction worker, I'd like to have a silver hat, please. And get to Moriarty's, where I wait for Leroy and hear who wants to be a mover and shaker. The last 5 years, my batting average is .016. That's that. And Leroy comes in and tells me Miles Davis was clubbed 12 times last night outside Birdland by a cop. A lady asks us for a nickel for a terrible disease, but we don't give her one. We don't like terrible diseases. Then we go eat some fish and some ale. It's cool, but crowded, and we don't like Lionel Trilling, we decide. We like Don Allen. We don't like Henry James so much. We like Herman Melville. We don't want to be in the Poets' Walk in San Francisco even. We just want to be rich and walk on girders in our silver hats. I wonder if one person out of the 8 million is thinking of me as I shake hands with Leroy and buy a strap for my wristwatch and go back to work, happy at the thought, possibly so. One thing about this poem is called tone poem. Sorry, I haven't mastered this device. One thing about Amiri was his tone. He had a really lovely, lilting voice. When I first knew you, you were just a kid. And I said, amazing, now we're the same age. It happens. Tone poem for Elvin Jones and Bob Thompson. A host of loves is the city, and its memory. Dead scents traveling from England on the sea for 200 years. The travelers show up in Japan to promote peace and prosperity, perhaps a piece of that nation's ass. Years later, plays rework the rhyme of lust as history and a cloud. Their faces bang invisible notes, wind scribbled leaves and foam. An eagle hangs above them, spinning. Years and travelers linger among the dead. No reports, gunshots, white puffs, deciding the season and the mode of compromise. The general good has no troops or armor. Subtly, the books stand closed, except sad facts circled for unknown hippies carrying the mail. I leave it there for them, full of hope and hurt. All the poems are full of it. Shit and hope and history. Read this line, young colored or white, and know I felt the twist of dividing memory. Blood spoiled in the air, caked and anonymous. Arms opened last night. We sat up, howling and kissing, men who loved each other. Will that be understood? That we could and still move under cold nights with clenched fists? Swing these losers by the tail. Got drunk, then high, then sick, then quiet. Thinking, but thinking, and of you, lovely shorties, sit in libraries seeking such ideas out. I'm here now, Leroy, who tried to say something long for you. Keep it. Forget me, or what I say, not the tone, an exit image. No points or theories. From now on, just me and mine. When they get me, just think of me as typing with a drink at my right hand. Some women who love me, and a day growing old and sloppy through the window. Thank you.
Darieck Scott.
I want to share a brief reflection on one of the things that most draws me to Amiri Baraka's work. And it's a kind of a puzzle. It's the nakedly, sort of exuberantly homophobic rhetoric that marks much of his writing in the period of the 1960s. And I think even using the word rhetoric is a little bit misleading because it might make us underestimate the impact of the language that he used. Because in many ways in that period, Baraka, I think, was one of the people who established a vocabulary and a kind of cultural political stance of black homophobia that lives on today. And yet, fascinatingly, this homophobia during that period was often or frequently paired with a willingness to confront or an unwillingness to avoid the ways that blackness takes meaning as a sexual category and the relationship between blackness and sexuality in general and his own black maleness and homosexuality in particular. So I'm going to read here from something that I wrote about Baraka's 1965 novel, The System of Dante's Hell, where this strange conjunction is operating. The System of Dante's Hell refigures Dante's pilgrim's journey through the circles of the Inferno by tracking the journey of main character Roy, who's clearly an autobiographical fiction of Baraka himself, from sin, defined in Baraka's words as the abandonment of one's local place or group, to salvation. The authentic blackness that Roy has lost, and that the author sets him on the road to find again, is marked by its sexual qualities. In the novel, sexuality is the means by which, or the medium in which, blackness is lost and betrayed, usually through homosexual experiences, and by which it's regained and secured, usually through heterosexual experiences. Roy's final destination and the location where heretics, those who betray their origins, are punished in Baraka's Inferno, is in a place called The Bottom. The Bottom is at once a black neighborhood in Shreveport, Louisiana, that Roy visited while on furlough from military service, and an existential rock bottom where Roy must finally confront the core of his self-betrayal and race betrayal to define himself anew. In one of the novel's last sequences, Roy goes walking into the darkness of the bottom, and I'm reading from this now. He hears a voice. Someone kneeling under one of the houses, or an arm in the shadow of a head. I stood straight and stiff and tried to see right through the dark. The voice came back, chiding like, something you want, whoever wants. I bent towards the space to see who it was, why they had called, and I saw it was a man, round, red-rimmed eyes, sand-colored Jew hair, and teeth for a face. He had been completely under the house, but when I came, he crawled out, and I saw his dripping smile and yellow, soggy skin full of red freckles. He said, "Come on, you. Come here a second." I moved to turn away, the face like a dull engine, eyes blinking. He grinned. "Let me suck your dick, honey, huh?" I was backing away like from the hyena cage. He came up off all fours and sat on his knees and toes, shaking his head and hips. "Come on, baby, come on now." As I moved back, he began to scream at me. All lust, all panic, all silence and sorrow. And finally, when I had moved and was trotting down the road, I looked around and he was standing up with his hands cupped to his mouth, yelling into the darkness in complete hatred of what was only some wraith. Irreligious spirit pushing through shadows, frustrating and confusing the flesh. So in this moment, Roy is presented with an opportunity to turn his back on his heretical past, and he is decisive, he runs away. Next, he encounters a dying soldier in the street who's also an image of his increasingly irrelevant older choices, and he runs from the soldier as well. But while fleeing, Roy ruminates, and here's the line that Baraka writes, "I wondered if Sweet Peter Eater would show up." In parentheses, "He told me his name." So no such conversation or exchange of names appears or is narrated in the previous telling. In that version of events which I just read you, Roy simply encounters the man and runs away. This retelling of his encounter with the man under the house indicates that there's been an exchange between Roy and Sweet Peter Eater, the character and dimensions of which we can only guess. Sweet Peter Eater, he told me his name, reads as mocking, maybe contemptuous, yet there's a strong suggestion of intimacy in the declaration. Peter Eater is sweet, and the appearance of their encounter in parentheses gives it a kind of cozy parallel universe feel, something that occurs in its own little hearth-warm space where only the two of them exist. Sweet Peter Eater. Why does Roy mention that the man told him his name except to emphasize that there's something shared between them? Certainly what is shared is their past and their blackness, and Roy too once ate Peter. There's a nostalgic sweetness then in this bonding which occurs in a context meant to be horrifying or to arouse revulsion. The event seems to demonstrate the extent to which Roy is lost and decadent and fights against this decadence. But the nostalgia and longing is there nonetheless. Baraka doesn't or cannot fully purge them. I close with Roy's thoughts as he's thinking about his past, his homosexual past, in Chicago. It was Chicago, the fags and winter. I walked the streets hunting for warmth, to be pushed under a quilt and call it love, to shit water for days and say I've been loved, been warm, a real thing in the world. See my shadow, my reflection. I'm here, alive. Touch me, please, please touch me. Thank you.
Robinson.
I'm going to read a few poems from Folklore. These are music poems. And then I'll read one of my own, since I've been writing about music too. And some of my favorite musicians are ones that Baraka also loved. Monk's World, around midnight. That street where midnight is round, the moon flat and blue, where fire engines solo and cats stand around and look, is Monk's World. When I last saw him turning around, high from 78 RPM, growling a landscape of spaced funk. When I last spoke to him, coming out the vanguard, he hipped me to my own secrets, like Nat. He dug the numbers and letters blowing through the grass, initials and invocations of the past. All the question I asked Monk, he answered first in a beret. Why was a high priest staring? Why were the black keys signifying? And who was wrapped in common magic, like a street empty of everything except weird birds? The last time Monk smiled, I read the piano's diary. His fingers, where he collected your feelings. The bar he circled to underscore the anonymous laughter of smoke and posters. Monk carried equations he danced at you. What's happening? We said, as he dipped and spun. What's happening? Everything. All the time. Every googolplex of a second. Like a door he opened, not disappearing, but remaining a distant profile of intimate revelation. Oh man, Monk was digging train now. Without a chaser, he drank himself in. And train reported from the 6th or 7th planet deep in the Thelonious-scape, where fire engines screamed the blues and night had a shiny mouth and scattered flying things. Monk Zen. Monk always come in a place later, long after you first see him come in. People say they didn't see him leave. Miles say, so what? Monks say, well, you needn't. Wilbur Ware say, me and Shadow and Train was with him when he went out. Who must have heard us? The dark is full of tears. When Albert returned from the grave, he said he had no horn. He asked us to look for it, and we agreed. He said he would return when we found it. He was somewhere in space, drugged about religion and the mob. I asked him, had he been murdered? Of course, Albert would answer. Most things like this, though. Murdered by God. That's why it was stupid to believe in him. And this last one is called Fusion Recipe. Take a pinch of, quote, R&B, add a smidgen of, quote, jazz, combine in a very shallow, mildly heated crock of Uncle Sam brand bovine fecal sauce. Then let the mixture sit until it turns to cheap furniture. And this one by me is called Triumph of the Underdog for Charles Mingus. The Western world is sad. A sad motherfucker that takes everything it doesn't steal. You are no color and were never born, O one who is, was, and will soon be. We are here to do this thing they call walking the dog, all up and down the frickin' planet, to hell and back, so put on a jacket. No one knows where they will die. It's not even interesting. More to the point is Gladiolus erectus, nothing to sneeze at, papa Mexican music from out in a car. Sound is the structure, classical, modern, or improvised, what have you. This is composition and marks the time you breathe in and or live in, if only to approach composure while flying apart in the wind and the rain. Thank you.
Nilofar Gardezi. Ah, okay. We'll just skip that. Scot Miller.
We'll grab a couple of these. Thank you for having me. I'd like to say I'm honored to be asked to come in and give some words to Amiri Baraka with some people I extremely admire when it comes to poetry and the word. I really like microphones. Amiri Baraka pretty much saved my life. I was writing a series of poems for this Nocturne's Review, literary review. You guys familiar with it? Giovanni Singleton, editor. The poems inspired me to start trying to write like a series of short stories. And I was inspired by Henry Dumas in particular. And there was something about what Dumas was doing with mythology that I found just really fascinating. So I started working on the pieces, and people were like, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm writing this thing. It's kind of like science fiction, but not quite. It's, it's kind of like mystical, but not really, it's not like, it's not like The Alchemist or anything like that. It's kind of like, and so one day I get a hold of this book, Echo Tree, the anthology, and, it's Ark of Bones. And Amiri Baraka had written the introduction to Ark of Bones, and he calls Henry Dumas's work afro-surreal expressionism. And a light just went off in my head, like, Bing, that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing. I'm doing afro-surreal expressionism. So I wrote this thing for the San Francisco Bay Guardian called the Afro-Surreal Manifesto in 2009. Since that time, they've had events around it over at Columbia College of the Arts and a whole bunch of stuff like that, which has been really cool watching the manifesto manifest. But it's very long, so I'm not going to make you endure that tonight. But I also work at Walden Pond Books, and what I was looking for was a manifesto from Amiri Baraka. So I went through a whole bunch of stuff, and I found this thing called How You Sound. How you sound is what we recent fellows are up to. How we sound, our peculiar grasp on, say, A, American speech, B, poetries of the world, C, ourselves, which is attitudes, logics, theories, jumbles of our lives and all that. D, and the final, the totality of mind, spiritual, God, or you name it, social, zeitgeist, or Heidegger's Umwelt. My poetry is whatever I think I am. Can I be light and weightless as a sail, heavy and clunking like 8 black boots? I can be anything I can. I make poetry with what I feel is useful and can be saved out of the garbage of our lives. What I see, am touched by, can hear. Wives, gardens, jobs, cement yards where cats pee. All my interminable artifacts, all are poetry and nothing moves with any grace, pried apart from all these things. There cannot be closet poetry unless the closet be as wide as God's eye. And all that means that I must be completely free to do just what I want in the poem. All is permitted, Ivan's crucial concept. There cannot be anything I must fit into the poem. Everything must be made to fit into the poem. There must not be any preconceived notion or design for what the poem ought to be. Who knows what a poem ought to sound like until it's dark, says Charles Olson. And I follow closely with that. I'm not interested in writing sonnets, sestinas, or anything, only poems. If the poem has got to be a sonnet, unlikely though, or whatever, it'll certainly let me know. The only recognizable tradition a poet needs to follow is himself. And with that, say all those things out of the tradition he can use, adapt, work over into something for himself, to broaden his own voice with. You have to start and finish there, your own voice. How you sound. Thank you.
The aforementioned Giovanni Singleton.
Good evening.
Good evening.
We do this at lunch poems. You say hello, what happens? Where are your manners? Good evening. The last time probably that I saw Mr. Amiri Baraka was probably about 2007. Nocturne's Review of the Literary Arts co-sponsored an event with the San Francisco State Poetry Center. And it was a collaboration between Amiri Baraka and Roscoe Mitchell. And I've always been really interested in the history of African American literary magazines and in editing. It seems like a lot of heavy lifting, but I wasn't interested in really reinventing the wheel. Didn't seem necessary. So on one occasion, I did ask Mr. Baraka about editing, and if he had any advice or any thoughts about it that he was interested in sharing. And what he said was, editing is not about judging; it's about choosing. And recently, I've taught a forms class, poetry forms class, and of course we can't do that without the beloved haiku. But Mr. Baraka, of course, came up with another version of that called the loku, and I would like to share a couple of those with you, and then end with conversation. Monday in B flat. I can pray all day, and God won't come. But if I call 911, the devil be here in a minute. Buddha asked monk, if you were always right, would it be easier or more difficult living in the world? I knew you'd ask that, said monk. Blue and invisible. Okay, and I'd like to end with a piece called Something About Mr. Amiri Baraka, A Last Conversation. And it's hard for me to write to occasion, but I look back in the notebook and it turns out that I actually had recorded a conversation that I had with him while I was in a 10-day silent meditation retreat. Setting, December 2013, or perhaps January 2014, North Fork, California, 85 miles outside of Yosemite National Park. Darkened meditation cell, 4 feet by 7 feet. It's day 6 of 10. Day 6 in particular has a reputation, a history of being the hardest one, volcanic, hell even. My 5th day 6 begins with a spontaneous recitation of names, a mandala, faces, Mr. Lorenzo Thomas, Ms. Alice Coltrane, Ms. Lucille Clifton, Ms. Jane Cortez, Ms. Wanda Coleman. Then a close-up. Mr. Amiri Baraka, in a hospital gown, steps out of a movie screen and zooms back behind a door that he then bars shut. There are no walls that I can see. I knock on the black steel. He opens a tiny window and says, "Hey, halt! Who goes there? Monk? Train? Who? Who? Who?" I speak my name. Wrong! But all right for the minute. What you want? Speak up, 'cause time is time, always running. I state my purpose. Well, Mr. Baraka, could you think about sticking around? Time being time and all. And the devil's still here. I have barely finished my sentence. A selfish appeal. When suddenly the black steel door falls forward and makes a loud boom on the ground. And there Mr. Baraka stands, surrounded by smoky jazz club fog. His gaze is precise like, could you be loved? Look, I'm tired of this shit, do you hear? Dig it. I tried to tell you cats, don't fuck with nature. And I for sure ain't gonna do it, 'cause I've seen what trouble can go down. Blues and jazz, they seen it too, and Brother Sun Ra. I can offer no argument. As he turns and walks away, a bit of his bare ass shows through the back of his blue and white hospital gown. Then, immediately, his head juts out from the fog. There is thunder and lightning, some bit of stormy weather. I gotcha, didn't I? That Richard Pryor shit does it every time. Yeah, whalers, wail on. Thank you.
Last reader, Mr. Al Young.
Well, Monk said it straight, it's out of town when you wait. You gotta be on, you gotta be here, you got to be here right now. Monk had the answer, the town's a dancer, you know you can't back up the moment, take it on the road with you, so now is the time. It was in, I think Syracuse, New York. Amiri Baraka and I were touring upstate New York, a tour that was arranged by a poet named Ron Abrams. And I had met him before, which I will tell you about, but he had come to the gig late. It was a morning gig, and his airplane was late getting in. And when he walked in, I was singing something. And after the reading, he came up to me and said, "Do you always sing?" I said, "Yes, I always sing." He said, "I'm gonna start doing that." And lo and behold, he did. A very complex man, as everyone has attested to. There are layers of Jones Baraka that will be peeling off decades to come, maybe centuries from now. I met him on the page in high school. I was one of those nerdy kids who was always looking out on the edges of anything that was going on, music, literature, whatever it was, and came across some of his poems and really started reading him when I was a freshman at the University of Michigan. Cut to 1964, I had relocated from Michigan to California, and there was something called the the first Negro Writers Conference, which was held at Asilomar, California. You know, it's down there off Monterey Bay. And it featured Kenneth Rexroth, the novelist Harvey Swados, the jazz journalist Nat Hintoff. Ralph Ellison was supposed to be there, but he canceled, and Adam David Miller, as I recall, read the talk that Ellison would have presented. Horace Caton was there. The Langston Hughes collaborator, who might think about Billy Joe?
Represent? Arnold Represent?
No, going way back.
Arnold
Bontemps, because something happened. I found out where Baraka was housed. He was in a sort of a cabin unit, and it was jumping. I mean, he traveled like Duke Ellington and Sammy Davis Jr. with about 500 albums, vinyl albums. I don't know how he brought them there, but records were playing continuously. Nat Hintoff would always be sitting in a chair as the music was spinning, and Leroy Jones was holding forth, and Hintoff had his pipe, and he had a notebook, and he write all these things down. It looked exactly the way that it was supposed to look. I was there illicitly because I didn't have the money to pay to go there, and so I just crashed, just acted as if I knew what I was doing. And I was calling him Mr. Jones. He said, "Don't cut out that Mr. Jones shit." I said, "What should I call you?" He said, "How about Roy?" I said, "It's okay to call you Roy?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Who are you anyway?" And I said, "Well, I'm just, this aspiring writer." He says, "Well, are you a writer or what? You're not an aspiring writer. You write or you don't write. Cut out this aspiring shit." And I hung around with him for 2 or 3 days, whenever I could, and learned some amazing things. He told me that he had a play that was going to open in New York, and I said, "What is it called?" He says, I'm calling it Dutchman. I said, Dutchman, that's an interesting title. I said, where's that coming from? He says, coming from Dutchman. You know, New York was Amsterdam, New Amsterdam. And he said, and they were Dutchmen. They colonized the place. And so I'm calling it Dutchman. And later when I saw the play, you know, the main character, Clay, and main characters, Clay and Lula, I had to smile because I knew what he was doing. Clay was the Dutchman. And he probably named him Clay, I'm just intuiting this, because he could be molded. And he flipped the roles so that the square was the Negro, Clay, and the hip person in the play was Lula, who ends up stabbing him after their subway ride. Most of you know that play. Amiri Baraka and his use of language in all of his many incarnations always fascinated me. Whatever he had taken it into his head to espouse or to preach or to follow or to lead, he had language that was always attractive for it. And I think that that's forgotten sometimes. There's a professor here at UC Berkeley named Robert Greenberg, who's a professor of music, and I've been listening to his great courses. He's on these great courses that you can buy. And I was listening in Salt Lake City last week to his 8-lecture course on Stravinsky. And he opens up that course by, he plays some Mozart, and he plays some Beethoven, and he plays, you know, standard 19th century, 18th, 19th century composers. And there's a consistency in their sound from beginning to end. But with Stravinsky, you know, you start with the Rites of Spring, you go through Petrushka, then you get into his neoclassical period. Very different person throughout the rest of his career, and he was around for, you know, 8 decades, more than 8 decades. And Greenberg used the term, he said, in the 20th century, the artist was expected to be a magician, to always change his act and always come up with something new and startling. And certainly, Leroy Jones, Amiri Baraka fulfill that expectation. One night at a Silmar, a wild party was going on downstairs at Leroy Jones's place. And upstairs, Arna Botoms was trying to go to sleep. I mean, he was what I am now. I was in my 20s, and Botoms was in his 70s. And he kept, you know, knocking on the floor, and nobody would respond. So finally, he called the police. And, and the police came, and they knocked at the door, and everybody got quiet. And Baraka went to the door, and he wouldn't talk to them in English. They were asking who he was, and he addressed them in German. He'd been studying German, and I was very impressed, impressed with that. And then when they went away, he said, "You seen those movies, you know, where the Gestapo knocks at your door, man?" He said, "That's the only language to talk to them in, because they don't understand anything else." At the time that we were touring upstate New York, he had newly been informed that he had contracted diabetes, and Amina, his beloved wife, had given him several pages of foods that he could eat and foods that he couldn't eat, and how to prepare this and how to prepare that and what to avoid and so forth. And he took it out and he showed it to me. He says, "You see this?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "My wife gave me all this, man. I can't do this, man. I'm just going to do what I want to do." And that's what he did for the next couple of decades, much to his own detriment. He drank, and he knew he shouldn't be drinking. He ate foods that appealed to him. And he just decided that's the way he wanted to go out, I suppose. He was a very generous person. He was actually, I think, fairly shy. I know that sounds strange. Miles Davis had that same quality. And they would conceal that with this belligerence, you know, with this truculent front in some ways. He blew my mind when he would go through these real shifts. He wrote Blues People, and he wrote black music. In black music, he champions avant-garde jazz and vernacular musicians. And then, when he joined some branch of the Revolutionary Communist Party, he rejected all of that, and he rejected Coltrane, He said all of that music is bourgeois navel-gazing. And he was championing people like Kool and the Gang. And he said the only valid music is black working class music. Then, when he had an opportunity to write a biography help Max Roach with his biography and to write about Miles Davis, when Miles Davis died in 1991, he jumped at the opportunity and he got the contract to work with Quincy Jones on his book. So go figure, he changed whatever he wanted to. He loved the world, he loved life, and he gave us a lot to love. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank the readers, the talkers. Thank all of you for coming. Continue the love. Go down the hall. Reception starts now. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.